The transformation of the Defiance was so sudden and complete that the alien commanders needed several seconds to understand what they were seeing. The crippled human ship that had been drifting helplessly under their barrage suddenly blazed with power as its true capabilities were revealed. Engines that had appeared offline roared to life with thrusts that pushed the massive vessel forward at acceleration rates that should have been impossible for its size and design. Captain Morrison felt the familiar pressure of high acceleration as his ship leaped forward like a predator that had finished playing with its prey. The crude chemical rockets that the aliens had dismissed as primitive technology were actually hybrid systems capable of tremendous performance when properly configured. What looked like simple fuel combustion was actually a complex process involving magnetic containment and plasma injection that produced far more thrust than any alien engineer would have thought possible. Lieutenant Amy Carter unleashed the full fury of human weapons technology as kinetic projectiles launched from concealed ports throughout the ship's hull. These were not the crude metal slugs that alien intelligence reports had described, but precisely engineered tungsten rods accelerated to velocities that turned them into relativistic weapons. The projectiles moved so fast that alien sensors barely detected them before impact. The first salvo struck the Zephyrian flagship with devastating effect, as tungsten rods punched through energy shields that were designed to stop plasma beams and particle weapons. The alien barriers simply did not exist as far as solid matter traveling at such tremendous speeds was concerned. The crystalline hull of Admiral Kextar's ship shattered like glass as kinetic projectiles tore through its elegant structure. Commander Vexara watched in horror as her own vessels came under attack from weapons that her technology could not even classify properly. The bioorganic hulls of hegemony ships had evolved to heal damage from energy weapons, but had no defense against physical trauma delivered at such extreme velocities. Living tissue that could adapt to almost any threat was torn apart by impacts that occurred faster than biological systems could respond. The alien fleets found themselves completely unprepared for warfare that followed rules they did not understand. Their beautiful ships with their elegant curves and sophisticated technology became death traps when facing an opponent who had learned to fight by different principles. Every advantage they thought they possessed turned into a liability when confronted with human ingenuity and centuries of military experience. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks felt deep satisfaction as his engines performed exactly as designed, while alien ships struggled to match the Defiance's sudden burst of speed and maneuverability. The human vessel twisted and rolled through space with agility that shocked observers who had expected it to lumber along like the flying brick they had mocked. Hidden maneuvering thrusters provided thrust vectors that let the ship dance around. Alien weapons fire with surprising grace. The energy that alien ships had poured into the Defiance during their attack was now being returned with interest as human weapon systems discharged their stored power in devastating barrages. Plasma cannons that had been hidden beneath fake hull plating emerged to fire beams that matched anything the galaxy had to offer. Missile launchers opened along the ship's flanks to release swarms of guided projectiles that could track and destroy enemy vessels. Sergeant Pete Collins led his Marines through airlocks and boarding tubes as the Defiance closed with damaged alien ships whose crews were too shocked to mount effective resistance. Human soldiers in powered armor proved devastating against aliens who had relied entirely on their superior technology, rather than developing any real combat skills. The Marines moved through enemy vessels like a force of nature that could not be stopped or reasoned with. The battle quickly turned into a rout as more human ships revealed themselves from hiding places throughout the Kepler station system. What the aliens had thought was a single isolated vessel was actually the lead element of a fleet that had been waiting in the asteroid fields and sensor shadows around the trading post. Dozens of human warships emerged from concealment to join the attack on the overconfident alien forces. Admiral Kextar tried to rally his remaining ships, but found that human weapons had targeted the quantum communication arrays that allowed his fleet to coordinate their movements. Each Zephyrian vessel was fighting alone against enemies who seemed to understand their technology better than they did. The elegant tactics that relied on synchronized energy beams and coordinated shield rotations fell apart when individual ships could not communicate with each other. Commander Vexara attempted to use her bioorganic vessel's adaptive capabilities to counter the human attack, but discovered that the enemy had somehow learned to exploit weaknesses in living tissue that her own scientists had never identified. Chemical weapons designed specifically to disrupt organic processes spread through her ships and paralyzed the biological components that gave hegemony technology its flexibility and power. The human fleet demonstrated tactical coordination that the aliens had not expected from a species they considered primitive. Every ship knew exactly where to be and when to fire for maximum effect. Communications were handled through systems that did not rely on quantum entanglement or exotic energy signatures that could be detected and disrupted. Human vessels worked together, like parts of a single organism dedicated to victory. Captain Morrison coordinated the battle from his bridge while his ship continued to tear through alien formations with weapons that violated every assumption the enemy had made about human capabilities. The Defiance was no longer pretending to be a crude metal brick, but was revealing itself as a sophisticated instrument of war that had been designed by people who understood that survival required more than just advanced technology. The alien boarding craft that had been approaching the human ship found themselves under attack from defensive systems that appeared out of nowhere as concealed weapon ports opened throughout the Defiance's hull. Point defense lasers and missile interceptors that had been completely invisible to enemy sensors began tracking and destroying every alien vessel within range. The boarding operation turned into a slaughter as human defenses proved far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Lieutenant Carter coordinated with weapons officers throughout the human fleet as they systematically dismantled alien formations that had seemed so impressive just minutes earlier. The enemy ships were fast and maneuverable, but their tactics were based on fighting opponents who followed the same technological development path they had chosen. Against humans who had deliberately chosen different solutions to the same problems, alien advantages became weaknesses that could be ruthlessly exploited. The Zephyrian crystalline hulls that looked so beautiful proved to be brittle when subjected to kinetic impacts at relativistic velocities. The quantum drives that provided such impressive acceleration became useless when their control systems were damaged by electromagnetic pulses from human weapons. The plasma beams that could vaporize asteroids were ineffective against armor designed to absorb and redirect energy, rather than simply resist it. The hegemony bioorganic ships fared even worse against opponents who understood biological warfare, in ways that purely technological species never could. Humans had spent millennia fighting diseases and developing chemical weapons that could target specific biological processes. The living components of alien vessels had no immunity to toxins that had been refined through centuries of research into the most effective ways to kill organic targets. Commander Lisa Hayes analyzed the battle from her science station and marveled at how completely human intelligence had penetrated alien technology during the months of preparation leading up to this confrontation. Every weakness had been catalogued, and every strength had been countered by weapons and tactics specifically designed to neutralize alien advantages. The victory was not just about superior firepower, but about superior understanding of the enemy. The alien fleets that had seemed so overwhelming when they arrived at Kepler Station were now scattered and broken as human ships hunted down survivors with methodical efficiency. Vessels that tried to flee found themselves pursued by opponents who knew exactly how their propulsion systems worked and could predict their movements. Ships that tried to hide discovered that human sensors could detect energy signatures that alien stealth technology could not conceal. Admiral Kextar's flagship was crippled and drifting as human marines breached its hull and began capturing alien crew members who had survived the kinetic bombardment. The proud Zephyrian commander found himself facing human soldiers whose armor and weapons represented technology he had never encountered before. His crystalline carapace was cracked, and his elegant uniform was torn as he was dragged to a human detention facility. Commander Vexara's bioship was dying around her as chemical weapons continued to eat away at the living components that formed its hull and internal systems. She could feel the vessel's pain through the neural links that connected her to its consciousness. The human attack had not just damaged her ship, but had murdered it in ways that seemed designed to cause maximum suffering to both the vessel and its crew. The first wave of alien weapons struck the Defiance with tremendous force, and the human ship shuddered under the impact. Plasma beams designed to melt through solid metal splashed across the hull like liquid fire. Energy drains reached invisible. fingers into the ship's power systems and began drawing electricity from the main reactors. To anyone watching, it looked like the human vessel was being torn apart by forces beyond its ability to resist. Admiral Kextar watched the attack from his command center and nodded with satisfaction as his weapons found their targets. The human ship was listing to one side as structural damage accumulated along its starboard hull. Electrical systems were failing throughout the vessel as the hegemony energy drains sucked power from every circuit they could reach. The battle was proceeding exactly as he had predicted. Commander Vexara monitored the bio-readings from the human ship and detected signs of atmospheric leakage from multiple hull breaches. The primitive metal construction was cracking under the stress of weapons designed to disable far more advanced vessels. Her energy drains were finding easy access to human electrical systems that lacked proper shielding against such attacks. What neither alien commander realized was that the damage they were observing was exactly what the humans wanted them to see. The Defiance had been built with layers of deception woven into its very structure. The hull plates that appeared to be cracking were actually designed to channel energy away from critical systems. The electrical failures were predetermined shutdown sequences that protected sensitive equipment. Lieutenant Amy Carter watched her tactical displays and smiled as alien weapons continued to pound her ship. Every plasma beam and energy drain was being analyzed by sensors hidden throughout the hull. The alien ships were revealing their exact weapon frequencies, power outputs, and firing patterns. They were giving away every secret of their advanced technology while congratulating themselves on an easy victory. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks worked in the depths of his ship where the real magic was happening. The energy that alien weapons poured into the Defiance was not being wasted or absorbed harmlessly. Instead, it was being captured by a network of superconducting cables and fed into massive storage cells that had been built into the ship's framework. Every alien attack was charging human weapons systems that the enemy could not detect. The human ship had been designed according to principles that alien engineers would never understand. Where other species built for efficiency and elegance, humans built for survival and victory. Every system had been tested under the worst possible conditions and designed to function when everything else failed. The crude exterior hid technology that could match anything in the galaxy. Sergeant Pete Collins moved through the ship with his security teams and prepared for the next phase of the battle. His Marines wore armor that looked bulky and primitive compared to alien equipment, but was actually more advanced than anything the enemy possessed. The suits were designed to operate in environments that would kill most aliens instantly. They could function in hard vacuum, resist energy weapons, and provide life support for days without external power. The alien fleets continued their attack with growing confidence as the human ship appeared to take more and more damage. Plasma beams carved glowing lines across the hull, while energy drains pulled gigawatts of power from the failing electrical systems. The Defiance was clearly outmatched and would surrender within minutes rather than face complete destruction. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge and watched the alien attack with calm satisfaction. His ship was performing exactly as designed, and the enemy was walking into a trap that had been centuries in the making. Human military doctrine was based on hard lessons learned through countless wars, where the winner was determined not by who had the best technology but by who could adapt fastest to changing conditions. The alien commanders began planning for the boarding phase of their operation. They would take control of the human ship and examine its primitive systems to understand how such a backward species had managed to reach the stars. The crew would be valuable as specimens for study and possibly as slaves for manual labor that did not require advanced education. Commander Lisa Hayes worked at her science station and compiled the final pieces of intelligence her sensors had gathered about the alien vessels. She now knew the exact shield frequencies both fleets used and had identified the power coupling systems that fed energy to their weapons. More importantly, she had discovered that alien technology relied heavily on quantum entanglement networks that could be disrupted by the right kind of interference. The Zephyrian ships were incredibly fast and maneuverable, but their crystalline hulls were brittle compared to human armor. Their weapons could fire devastating plasma bursts, but needed several seconds to recharge between shots. Their shields could deflect energy weapons, but were not designed to stop solid projectiles moving at high velocity. The hegemony vessels were even more vulnerable in ways their crews did not understand. The bioorganic components that gave their ships such impressive adaptability also created weaknesses that could be exploited by anyone who understood biological warfare. Their living hulls could heal from energy damage, but would react badly to certain chemical compounds that humans had been using for centuries. Both alien fleets had made the same fundamental mistake of assuming that superior technology guaranteed victory. They had never fought an opponent who understood their weaknesses because no other species in the galaxy built ships the way humans did. Every other civilization had followed the same path toward energy-based weapons and quantum drives that the aliens considered the obvious choice. The attack continued for another 10 minutes, while the human ship appeared to suffer catastrophic damage from the alien assault. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into space and electrical fires flickered through transparent sections of the superstructure. The Defiance was listing heavily and seemed to have lost main engine power as it drifted helplessly under the alien barrage. Admiral Kekstar decided that the human ship had been sufficiently weakened and ordered his fleet to prepare boarding parties. The demonstration was complete, and now it was time to claim their prize. Human technology would be studied and reverse-engineered while the crew provided valuable intelligence about Earth's military capabilities and weaknesses. Commander Vexara agreed that the battle phase was over and began deploying biomechanical parasites that would infiltrate the human ship and subdue its crew without causing permanent damage. The aliens still saw humans as potentially valuable slaves who should not be harmed unnecessarily during the capture process. What the alien commanders did not realize was that their boarding preparations had triggered the final phase of the human battle plan. Captain Morrison had been waiting for exactly this moment when the enemy would lower their guard and move close enough to spring the trap that had been carefully prepared over the past several hours. The captain looked around his bridge officers who appeared to be struggling with damaged systems and failing equipment. In reality, every station was functioning perfectly, and his crew was ready to demonstrate why humans had survived so many wars against seemingly superior opponents. The time for deception was nearly over. Lieutenant Carter received confirmation that all weapon systems were fully charged and ready to fire. The energy that alien ships had poured into the Defiance over the past 20 minutes was now stored in capacitors and ready to be released in ways the enemy would never expect. Human kinetic weapons were targeted and loaded with projectiles designed specifically to penetrate alien shield technology. Chief Brooks reported that the main engines were ready to provide full power on demand, despite appearing to be offline, to alien sensors. The ship's maneuvering thrusters were also functional and could push the massive vessel through space faster than the aliens thought possible. Everything was ready for the surprise that would change the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy. The alien boarding craft launched from their motherships and began approaching the crippled human vessel. They moved slowly and confidently, because their sensors detected no active weapons or defensive systems aboard the Defiance. The human ship appeared to be completely helpless and ready for capture. Captain Morrison watched the approaching enemy craft and counted down the seconds until they reached the optimal range for what would happen next. His finger hovered over the control that would signal the beginning of humanity's response to alien arrogance. The trap was set, and the enemy had walked directly into it, exactly as planned. Outside the bridge windows, alien ships moved with fluid grace as they prepared to claim victory over the primitive human warship. Their crews celebrated what they saw as an easy triumph over a backward species that had dared to challenge their technological superiority. None of them suspected that they were about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating human ingenuity. The moment arrived when Captain Morrison gave the signal that his crew had been waiting for, and the real battle began. Admiral Kekstar stood in his command center and studied the holographic display showing the human warship. The image rotated slowly as his computers analyzed every surface and component they could detect. The results were exactly what he expected to see. Primitive construction methods, outdated materials, and weapon systems that belonged in a museum. The Zephyrian admiral had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy, and he knew how to read an enemy ship. The human vessel showed all the signs of a species that had never evolved beyond basic engineering principles. They still used chemical reactions for propulsion when any civilized race knew that quantum drives were far superior. They relied on physical armor when energy shields could stop any attack. Commander Vexara joined the analysis from her own ship through a quantum communication link. Her bioorganic vessel had already tasted the energy signatures coming from the human warship and found them crude beyond belief. The ship leaked heat and radiation like a broken reactor. Its power systems were so inefficient that half the energy was wasted as excess thermal output. Together, the two alien commanders reviewed intelligence reports that had been gathered about human military technology over the past several months. Every encounter painted the same picture of a species that compensated for technological inferiority through sheer stubbornness. Humans built their ships big and heavy because they did not know how to make them efficient. The report showed that human vessels relied on what the aliens called brute force engineering, where advanced species used elegant solutions that required minimal resources. Humans threw more metal and more fuel at every problem. Their ships were overbuilt and redundant to an almost comical degree. Every system had backup systems, and those backup systems had their own backups. On the Defiance, Commander Lisa Hayes worked quietly at her science station while the alien ships continued their detailed scans. She had been monitoring their sensor sweeps since they arrived at the station and building a detailed picture of how their technology worked. The aliens were so confident in their superiority that they made no effort to hide their capabilities. The Zephyrian ships used crystalline matrices to focus and amplify energy from their quantum cores. Their weapons could fire devastating plasma bursts but required several seconds to charge between shots. Their shields operated on rotating frequencies to prevent overload, but this created predictable gaps in their defenses every few minutes. The hegemony vessels were more complex because they used living tissue integrated with mechanical components. Their weapons were actually living creatures that could adapt to different targets but needed time to analyze and adjust. Their hulls could heal from damage but were vulnerable to anything that disrupted their biological processes. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks moved through the lower decks of his ship and checked systems that the aliens could not detect from outside. Hidden beneath the crude exterior were sensor arrays and processing units that rivaled anything the galaxy had to offer. The human ship looked primitive because it was designed to look primitive. Every human warship was built according to principles learned through centuries of warfare on Earth. Humans had fought each other with everything from sticks and stones to nuclear weapons. They understood that in a real fight, the enemy would not play fair and technology could fail at the worst possible moment. So they built their ships to function even when everything went wrong. The alien commanders continued their analysis and focused on what they saw as obvious weaknesses in human design. The ship had multiple hull breaches that appeared to be repair patches from previous battles. Its weapons were mounted externally, where they could be easily damaged or destroyed. The armor plating was thick, but showed stress fractures and wear patterns that suggested the ship was already falling apart. Admiral Kextar called a meeting of his senior staff to discuss attack strategies against the human vessel. His tactical officers presented several options for disabling the ship quickly and efficiently. They could use plasma bursts to melt through the crude armor or energy lances to overload the primitive electrical systems. The battle should be over in minutes. Commander Vexara held a similar meeting on her flagship where her biospecialists analyzed the best ways to neutralize human technology. They suggested using energy drains to suck power from the ship's systems or biotoxins that could corrode the metal hull. The humans would surrender as soon as they realized how outmatched they were. Neither alien commander considered the possibility that they might be wrong about human capabilities. Their own technology was so far advanced that they could not imagine any species choosing to build ships the way humans did. It had to be ignorance or incompetence rather than a deliberate design philosophy. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at her tactical station and listened to the alien communications with growing amusement. The enemy ships were broadcasting their attack plans to each other without any encryption because they assumed humans lacked the technology to intercept their signals. They were planning to disable rather than destroy the Defiance because they still saw humans as potentially useful slaves. The alien fleets began moving into position for what they expected to be a brief demonstration of their superiority. The Zephyrian ships arranged themselves in a formation that would let them focus their plasma weapons on specific sections of the human vessel. The hegemony ships positioned themselves to drain power from the human systems while their allies provided covering fire. Captain Morrison received regular updates from his officers as they monitored the alien preparations. The enemy was making exactly the mistakes he had hoped they would make. They were so focused on showing off their advanced technology that they ignored basic tactical principles that humans had learned centuries ago. The human ship continued to drift quietly, while its crew prepared for battle in ways the aliens could not detect. Internal communications used fiber optic cables that produced no electromagnetic signatures. Weapon systems were powered up using stored energy that had been slowly accumulated over the past several hours. Defensive systems came online without changing the ship's external appearance. Sergeant Pete Collins moved through the ship with his security teams and checked equipment that would not be needed until the battle began. Human Marines wore powered armor that looked crude compared to alien technology, but was built to function in environments that would kill most other species. Their weapons used chemical propellants and metal projectiles that could punch through energy shields designed to stop plasma beams. The alien commanders made their final preparations and sent messages to their respective governments claiming credit for the coming victory. They had trapped a human warship far from any reinforcements and would demonstrate once and for all that primitive species had no place among the galactic powers. The humans would either submit to alien authority or be destroyed as an example to others. Admiral Kekstar opened a communication channel to the human ship and delivered his final ultimatum. The humans had 1 hour to power down their weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance would be met with overwhelming force that would reduce their ship to scrap metal floating in space. He expected immediate surrender from a species too, backward to understand the situation they faced. Commander Vexara added her own threats about the bioweapons her ships could deploy against organic targets. Human bodies would not survive exposure to the toxins and parasites her vessels carried. The crew of the Defiance would die slowly and painfully unless they submitted to alien authority within the time limit. Captain Morrison listened to the ultimatum without changing expression and then closed the communication channel without responding. He turned to his bridge crew and gave quiet orders that would prepare his ship for the kind of battle the aliens did not expect. The Defiance would not run or surrender or beg for mercy. The alien fleets completed their attack formations as the deadline approached. Dozens of advanced warships surrounded the single human vessel like predators circling wounded prey, their weapons charged with energy that could vaporize asteroids and their shields flickered with power that could deflect anything the primitive humans might throw at them. On the bridge of the Defiance, the senior officers took their positions and waited for the captain's orders. Outside their windows, alien ships moved with fluid grace that spoke of technology beyond human understanding. Energy cascaded across their hulls in patterns that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. The hour passed and the aliens detected no surrender signal from the human ship. If anything, the vessel appeared to be losing power as its engines dimmed and its external lights flickered. To alien sensors, it looked like a dying ship whose crew was too proud or too stupid to accept the inevitable. Admiral Kekstar gave the order to begin the attack, and his ships responded with coordinated precision. Plasma beams lanced out toward the human vessel, while energy drains reached through space to suck power from its primitive systems. The demonstration of alien superiority had begun and would be over within minutes. The human warship sat motionless in space as the first alien weapons struck its hull. The massive space station called Kepler Station floated in the darkness between stars like a giant metal city. Ships from dozens of alien worlds docked at its ports every day to trade goods and share information. The station buzzed with activity as creatures of all shapes and sizes moved through its corridors. Some had scales that shimmered like jewels, while others had skin that glowed with soft light. All of them were here for the same reason today. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked out at the alien vessels surrounding them. His ship was called the UES Defiance, and it looked nothing like the other warships at the station. Where the alien ships curved and flowed like works of art, his ship was all straight lines and hard angles. where they gleamed with energy that pulsed through their hulls. His ship was gray metal that reflected the distant stars. The Defiance was big and heavy compared to the sleek alien vessels. Its weapons were mounted on the outside where everyone could see them. Thick armor plates covered every surface and small rockets stuck out from various points along the hull. To anyone watching, it looked like something built in a garage by someone who had never seen a real spaceship before. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at her station and listened to the radio chatter between the alien ships. Her computer translated their words into English, and she did not like what she was hearing. The aliens were talking about the human ship, and they were laughing. They called it a flying brick and wondered how it had even made it to the station without falling apart. The Zephyrian fleet had arrived first. Their ships looked like they were made of crystal and light. Admiral Kekstar commanded them from his flagship, which was twice the size of the Defiance but seemed to weigh nothing at all. Energy flowed across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ship moved through space like a fish swimming through water. Behind the Zephyrians came the hegemony vessels. These ships were different but just as impressive. They looked alive somehow, with surfaces that rippled and changed color. Commander Vexara led them in a ship that seemed to breathe as it moved. Tendrils of energy reached out from its hull and touched the space around it as if tasting the vacuum. Both alien fleets positioned themselves so they could see the human ship clearly. Their crews gathered at viewing ports to stare at the crude vessel that dared to call itself a warship. Some of them took pictures to show their friends back home. Others made jokes about how primitive the humans must be to build such a thing. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks worked in the engine room of the Defiance and tried to ignore the alien scans washing over his ship. Every few minutes, another vessel would point its sensors at them and examine every bolt and plate. The readings they got back must have confused them because they kept scanning the same areas over and over again. The human ship used chemical rockets for propulsion, while the aliens used exotic energy drives that bent space around them. The humans had kinetic weapons that shot metal projectiles, while the aliens used plasma beams and energy lances. The human ship was armored with steel and ceramic, while the alien vessels relied on shields made of pure force. To the aliens, the human technology looked like something from their ancient past. It reminded them of the first crude rockets their own species had built when they were still learning to leave their home worlds. They could not understand why humans would choose to build their ships this way when better technology clearly existed. Captain Morrison walked to the communications station where Ensign Kelly Price was monitoring the diplomatic channels. The alien representatives were holding meetings about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. They spoke as if humans were not even present at the station. The Zephyrians and Hegemony had formed an alliance during their journey to Kepler Station. They planned to divide up this section of space between them and push out any species they considered inferior. The humans were at the top of their list of primitive civilizations that needed to be managed by their betters. Admiral Kekstar sent a message to the station commander, demanding that the human ship be moved to a less prominent docking port. He said it was embarrassing to have such a crude vessel visible to other advanced civilizations. Commander Vexara agreed and suggested that humans should focus on mining operations and basic labor, instead of trying to play with the big ships. The insults continued throughout the day as more alien vessels arrived at the station. Each new species that saw the Defiance had the same reaction. They pointed and laughed and made jokes about the simple humans who thought they could build a real warship. Some of them offered to sell the humans proper technology at huge prices. Lieutenant Carter reported that the alien ships were sharing sensor data about the Defiance. They were building detailed files on human technology and finding weaknesses they could exploit. The information was being sent to military commands across dozens of star systems. Soon, every alien fleet would know exactly how to defeat human vessels in combat. Chief Brooks continued his work in the engine room, while alien sensors probed deeper into his ship. The readings showed exactly what he expected them to show. Crude, chemical rockets burning liquid fuel to create thrust. Simple metal armor welded together in basic patterns. Kinetic weapons that used explosive charges to fire metal slugs through space. Everything looked primitive and weak. The diplomatic meeting began in the evening with representatives from every major species at the station. The humans sent Commander Lisa Hayes to speak for Earth while the aliens sent their military leaders. The meeting room was filled with creatures that glowed and sparkled and changed colors as they spoke. The discussion quickly turned to territorial rights and trade agreements. The Zephyrians claimed a large section of space that included several human colonies. The hegemony demanded exclusive trading rights with species they considered too primitive to handle their own commerce. Both groups looked directly at the human representative when they talked about primitive species. Commander Hayes tried to present humanity's case, but the aliens barely listened. They had already decided that humans were too backward to deserve equal treatment. The evidence was right outside the station, where their crude warship sat like a museum piece among the elegant alien vessels. As the meeting ended, Admiral Kextar delivered an ultimatum to the human commander. Humanity could accept junior status in the galactic community and follow alien guidance in all matters, or they could face the consequences of their stubborn pride. The choice was theirs, but they had until morning to decide. Captain Morrison received the message and gathered his senior officers in the ready room. They looked out through the transparent aluminum window at the alien fleet surrounding their ship. Dozens of advanced vessels filled with weapons and technology beyond human understanding. Against them stood one human ship that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. The captain smiled as he watched an alien patrol ship glide past their window. Its hull rippled with energy patterns that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. He turned to his officers and gave them their orders. All non-essential systems were to be powered down immediately. The ship should appear as helpless and primitive as possible. Outside the station, the alien fleets began to move into attack formations, while the human warship drifted quietly in the darkness waiting for dawn. The detention block aboard the Defiance was filled with alien prisoners who stared at their human captors with mixtures of fear, confusion, and dawning respect. Admiral Kextar sat in his cell with his crystalline carapace still showing cracks from the battle while he tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The elegant Zephyrian had spent his entire career believing that superior technology guaranteed victory in any conflict. Commander Vexara occupied the adjacent cell, where she mourned not just her defeat, but the death of her bio-organic ship, which had been like a living extension of herself. The hegemony officer's connection to her vessel through neural implants meant that she had felt every moment of its agony as human chemical weapons dissolved the living components that formed its hull and internal systems. Captain Morrison entered the detention area with a datapad containing intelligence reports from the battle and preliminary assessments of alien technology that his science teams had recovered from the wreckage. The human commander looked tired but satisfied as he reviewed the tactical analysis that would be transmitted to Earth Command within the next few hours. The alien prisoners watched their captor with new eyes that saw not a primitive barbarian, but a skilled military professional who had orchestrated one of the most complete victories in recent galactic history. The man they had dismissed as commanding a flying brick had proven himself to be a tactical genius who understood warfare at levels they were only beginning to appreciate. Lieutenant Amy Carter worked at her station and compiled after-action reports that detailed exactly how human weapons and tactics had neutralized every alien advantage so quickly and completely. The battle had been won not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of the enemy and careful preparation that had taken months to complete. The kinetic weapons that had torn through alien shields and hulls were not crude metal projectiles but precision-engineered systems that had been designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in energy-based defensive technology. Human scientists had spent years studying alien shield frequencies and had developed projectiles that could pass through force barriers as if they did not exist. The chemical weapons that had devastated hegemony bioships were not random toxins, but carefully formulated compounds that targeted specific biological processes used by alien biotechnology. Human researchers had analyzed samples of living ship components obtained through diplomatic channels and had created weapons that could kill organic vessels while leaving their crews alive for capture and interrogation. Chief Engineer Danny Brooks supervised repair teams that were already fixing the cosmetic damage to his ship's hull, while alien observers watched in amazement. The battle scars that had looked so severe during the fight were mostly superficial wounds that could be patched within hours. The real damage had been to alien preconceptions about human engineering capabilities. The hybrid propulsion system that had given the Defiant such surprising speed and agility was just one example of human innovation that alien intelligence services had completely failed to understand. Where other species had chosen between chemical rockets or exotic energy drives, humans had combined both technologies to create propulsion systems that were more versatile and reliable than either approach alone. Commander Lisa Hayes analyzed the intelligence data that human sensors had gathered during the battle and marveled at how completely alien technology had been penetrated by months of careful observation and analysis. Every Zephyrian ship design had been mapped down to individual circuit pathways, while every hegemony biovessel had been studied until its biological processes were better understood than the aliens understood them themselves. The victory at Kepler Station was already having effects throughout the galaxy, as news of the battle spread through communication networks that connected dozens of star systems. Species that had dismissed humanity as a primitive race suitable only for manual labor were suddenly reassessing their assumptions about human capabilities and intentions. The Zephyrian High Command issued emergency orders to all their fleets, warning them to avoid contact with human vessels until new tactical doctrines could be developed. The elegant crystalline ships that had dominated space battles for centuries would need to be redesigned from the ground up to counter weapons and tactics that violated every assumption about proper military technology. The Hegemony Council held emergency sessions where bioengineers tried to understand how their living ships could be made immune to chemical weapons that seemed designed specifically to kill organic technology. The adaptive capabilities that made their vessels so effective against conventional enemies were useless against opponents who understood biological warfare better than they understood it themselves. Captain Morrison met with the senior alien prisoners in the detention block's conference room, where he explained exactly what had happened during the battle and why their defeat had been so complete. The human commander spoke without arrogance or cruelty, but with the calm confidence of someone who had proven his point through demonstrated competence rather than empty threats. Admiral Kextar listened to the tactical analysis with growing understanding of how thoroughly his fleet had been outmaneuvered by opponents he had never taken seriously. The human ships had not just been faster and more maneuverable than expected, but had been positioned exactly where they needed to be to exploit every weakness in Zephyrian formations and technology. Commander Vexara realized that human intelligence about hegemony capabilities had been far more complete than her own government's knowledge of human technology. The weapons that had destroyed her fleet had been designed by people who understood bioorganic systems at levels that surpassed even hegemony scientists who had developed the technology over thousands of years. The diplomatic representatives who had attended the original meeting at Kepler Station were requesting emergency sessions with human negotiators as they scrambled to avoid the fate that had befallen the Zephyrian and hegemony fleets. Species that had planned to divide up human space among themselves were now offering trade agreements and mutual defense pacts with the people they had threatened just hours earlier. Sergeant Pete Collins supervised the integration of alien prisoners into work details that would help repair the damage from the battle, while demonstrating human principles about the treatment of captives. The Marines who had stormed alien ships with such devastating effect were now providing medical care and protection to enemy personnel who had expected to be tortured or executed. The alien prisoners watched their human captors with growing amazement as they observed military professionalism that exceeded anything they had seen in their own fleets. The humans who had fought so ruthlessly during the battle showed mercy and competence in victory that earned respect even from former enemies who had been defeated so completely. News of the human victory reached Earth within days as quantum communication arrays transmitted detailed reports about the battle and its aftermath to military commanders and political leaders throughout human space. The success at Kepler Station would change humanity's position in galactic politics and open new opportunities for expansion and exploration. The Defiance and its escort fleet began preparations for the journey back to Earth, where they would be welcomed as heroes who had proven that human engineering and tactics could defeat any opponent regardless of technological advantages. The ship that aliens had mocked as a flying brick would become a symbol of human ingenuity and determination. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge one final time before departing Kepler Station and looked out at the alien ships that were salvaging wreckage from their defeated fleets. The elegant vessels that had seemed so impressive when they arrived now looked fragile and over-specialized compared to the robust human warships that had proven their worth in actual combat. The lesson taught at Kepler Station would spread throughout the galaxy as other species learned that technological advancement was not just about building faster ships or more powerful weapons. Real military superiority came from understanding your opponents and building systems that could function under the worst possible conditions when everything else failed. Lieutenant Carter reported that long-range sensors were detecting alien fleets throughout the sector, changing course to avoid contact with human vessels. The species that had planned to subjugate humanity were now afraid to face opponents who had demonstrated such complete tactical superiority over supposedly advanced technology. Chief Brooks made final preparations for the journey home, while reflecting on how completely alien engineers had misunderstood human design philosophy. Where other species built for optimal performance under ideal conditions, humans built for survival under impossible conditions. The difference had proven decisive when theory met reality in actual combat. The human fleet departed Kepler Station, with alien prisoners who would be exchanged for concessions and treaties that recognized humanity as an equal partner in galactic civilization. The species that had laughed at human warships would never make that mistake again.